Welcome to the Macmillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkes, your host, and our guest is Frederick Wherry, a professor of sociology. He is an economic and cultural sociologist who toggles between domestic and global investigations of money, value, and social life. He has published 5 books and a 4-volume encyclopedia. Today we'll talk with Professor Wherry about his new book, Money Talks, explaining how money really works. Welcome, Professor Wherry.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin with an overview of your book. Tell us about it.
Well, it is a collaborative effort. The other 2 editors of the volume are Nina Bandel at the University of California, Irvine, and Viviana Zelizer at Princeton. And what we did was we looked for people who were leaders in their fields in sociology, economics, political science, anthropology, and law. And these were people who are asking questions about what is money and how are people using it. And they're asking questions that defy the typical understandings of what money means in the lives of ordinary people.
Such as what?
So one of the things that we ask is when people are making decisions about when to take on debt, when to save, when to spend, how are they doing it? And one of the core findings across the chapters is the importance of social relationships, moral evaluations, and institutions. And so we have some chapters that that explore this at the household level and others that go up to the corporate level. And so even the way that corporate entities do their budgeting relies on both understandings of tradition and social relationships. And that, I think, is a strange finding for some.
Okay. So what was the catalyst for the book? What led you to write it? And I know, actually, it's a volume. Yeah. It's a collection of papers.
Yes. And so Nina Bandel and I had been in conversation about work that we were doing on separate projects, and she had been doing some work on foreign direct investments and now had moved to investigations of why people do their charitable givings in the way that they do. And then I had started engaging with people doing innovative work in financial services and thinking about how to include more people in an equitable way in the financial system. And so as we were trying to help each other through some of our puzzles, we kept going back to the social meaning of money, which was one of the common touchstones for us. And then we reached out to the editor, to the author of The Social Meaning of Money, Viviana Zelizer, who had been our advisor in graduate school. And we said, look, we were thinking about sort of having a gathering of people who were doing this work across different disciplines. We were thinking about calling it Money Talks and had reached out to the law school here and had Daniel Markovitz come in as a co-convener for the gathering. And as we described the meeting to Viviana, she then sort of went looking through her folders. She said, you won't believe this. But she had a vanilla folder in which she and the late Chuck Tilley had come up with a similar idea to have a similar type of convening. And it had some of the same names that we had listed in terms of people to be involved in the gathering and in the volume. And while I'm not a suspicious person, I am responsive to serendipity.
Right. Okay, interesting. So let's talk about what you mean by the social aspects of money. Help us understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, so when we think about something being social, we mean that when people are using money, they're necessarily taking account of others. We also mean that money itself has a social life. If you think about it, money goes by a number of different names and nicknames. Even in the way that we think about how we budget our money, we talk about that's the college money, that's the gas money, there's grocery money. And by virtue of having these different names, we attach different rules to it. And so money is not just a mathematical entity in which we make trade-offs based on the math, but we're actually making trade-offs based on a whole set of meanings that we assign to these categories. The other thing, too, that we sometimes forget is that money also finds itself bumping up against moral limits. And so there are some things that we say money should not buy, even if there are some good reasons why putting some things into sort of a price-based market may help sort of in terms of with clearance. And so we see sort of all these different social aspects of money, even in its aesthetics, and sometimes even the way that the money is designed can be polarizing in some countries, or as a form of bringing people together and generating a sense of solidarity. And so in all these different ways, we think about money as social and also money as an instrument that we're using when we are affirming our relationships with others, and sometimes when we're ending a relationship.
Okay, interesting. I know you wrote one of the chapters in the book. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the chapter I wrote wanted to draw attention to these moments in which the way we use our money, it's public. It's typically in these moments in which people are making life transitions. And so you could imagine you have a child who just is finishing high school. Whether or not you celebrate graduation, the child will have the credential. And yet you have a number of families who during these sort of life transition moments, and also at the time of death and going into afterlife, there's a sense that money has to be spent, and the family will prioritize that spending even at very high cost to themselves, even when they're told this makes no sense.
Right.
And so one of the things that I demonstrated in that chapter is the existing work that looks at how we make how we place a lot of moral weight on these transition points, and the extent to which sometimes what should look like a choice and look as if we have a menu of choices, those choices begin to collapse. And so that chapter is meant to bring in sort of some of the empirical ways in which we see the menu of choices collapsing by virtue of the weight that's given to a life transition.
And so let's talk about the methodology. How did you get at looking at those choices, or perhaps lack of choices?
Yeah, so there are two ways. So in that particular chapter, I both relied on some existing work in which they conduct some experiments, and in the experiments, you're both basically told that a particular outcome led to a moral good or a moral bad, and then you're asking people to reason through those outcomes. And by virtue of the way they reason through the outcome, you start seeing that they have trouble differentiating between the choice that they made and whether or not the choice led to this moral bad. And so there are these moments in which the outcome, you should be able to separate it out and say, oh, actually, that experiment's complicated. Let me move to a different experiment.
Okay.
A different way that we do this is through interviews. And so in an interview, you can set up a set of scenarios and then ask people why they made a decision and why they almost made a decision. And so one of the ways that we really see how morality works is in those moments in which someone is very close to saying a yes or a no, but they then choose to do otherwise. And that's where they have to offer an account of, why did I make the decision that I did?
Right.
And so that's one of the ways that we qualitatively try to assess how morality is working itself out in a monetary decision.
Right, that's interesting. I know money has significantly changed over the past few decades in terms of, a lot of people don't use cash anymore. Everything is credit card based. In fact, in some places you can only use a credit card to pay for things. In your book, you do look at the new technology around money. I'm wondering if Bitcoin is a part of that as well. So talk a little bit about the new money, I'll call it.
Yes, the new money. And so we have several authors, Nigel Dodd and Bill Maurer in particular, who are very concerned with these new monies. And one of the things that they, particularly Nigel, make a strong claim about is, and the future of money is not tied to the state. And so we often think about sort of states as issuing coin and legal tender. And in the future of money, a lot of it's electronic and coming out of the private sector. The other thing, too, that they note is even though you would think that because Bitcoin, it's ones and zeros, it should be free of some of our social concerns and social markings, and yet people are still trying to mark it up. So even with an electronic currency, they're putting in little hashtags and they're making little drawings. in addition to placing memos on some of their transfers. And so for some reason, we have this tendency to want to kind of mark why we're doing the things that we're doing with our money, even when it's on an electronic platform. The other thing, too, that they note is the extent to which some of these alternative payment systems help us to do better sharing together. So we can split up a bill with friends on our Venmo, or we can do a peer-to-peer lending platform and remain in touch and affirm our commitment to other people by virtue of how we transfer and the kind of tags we place on those transfers. And so I think the future of money is one in which sociability will come back in, especially in these electronic platforms, as a way of helping people to affirm why they're doing it, and maintaining a sense of commitment as they decide they're going to give a loan to a friend or split up some payments.
Right, right. So what do you conclude in your book?
Oh, so one of the things that we conclude is that the thing that we don't do enough of is pay attention to how when people are using money, they're trying to generate a sense of belonging with others, and they're working on their relationships. And one of the mistakes we make is when we think about people as users of money as individuals who are not tied to other individuals. And so part of what the book does is it pushes for this radical rethink of the economic actor as not just an individual, but a set of dyads in which you're constantly tied to others and you're constantly negotiating what your use of a particular form of money will do to those ties. And so it's sort of an insistence on the centrality of relationships in monetary management.
Okay. I'm curious, do you also look at people's, how people perceive themselves and their self-worth through money? The more money I have, the more successful I am, or the less money I have, the least successful I am. Do you look at that kind of thing?
So what we do instead is we have a moment at which we ask for people who feel as if they have lots of money, sort of, how do they use it? What do they do in terms of charitable giving?
Okay.
And when they're making decisions about charitable giving, how are they, why are they going to privilege something like the American Cancer Society over a different type of charity? And one of the things that we find is when you have a sense of cancer, for example, it happened to someone I know, particularly a family member. Across gender, you get more of a commitment to supporting those kinds of causes, particularly when that's compared with the different charity in which there is not a sense of someone I know, someone close to me has or could easily be confronted with that particular type of problem. And so even the ways in which we are imagining the good that the money does, we're doing that also through our relationship.
Okay. And then I know you are working on a new project. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it? And does this one tie into it at all?
Yes, yes. So I'm working on these two new projects that are very closely tied. There's the one project in which we are investigating rotating savings and credit associations that have been now formalized, and they are now these what are called lending circles. And it's an innovation out at the Mission Asset Fund in the Bay Area. And what they did essentially is they said that a lot of people responsibly use money and credit, but they just don't get credit for it. And these are people who are using a lot of these informal financial services, a lot of them in the immigrant community. And what they wanted to do was find a way to make those practices visible and to affirm positive financial practices that were happening under the radar. And they did this by partnering with both Citibank for helping them to run these lending circles electronically, and with 3 credit agencies, reporting agencies. And so what then happens is people who weren't in the financial system at all, showing up with a credit score, or those with very weak scores, found themselves getting these positive pings for on-time payments on a social loan.
Okay.
And they also felt comfortable engaging in these particular financial services by virtue of the fact that they said, this is something that I saw my parents doing. And it just, all they had to do was affirm it and formalize it.
Right.
And so one of the things that we're doing with the Mission Asset Fund is we've been able to ask a lot of questions of their clients and sort of follow their staff people around and just ask, so what does it mean to have an affirming experience when using money, an affirming experience when developing credit? The other thing that we've completed phase 1 of that project, finishing one book project called Financial Citizenship with my collaborators, one at Michigan, Kristen Seefeld, and the other one at Cal State Fullerton, Anthony Alvarez. The other thing that I'm doing is thinking about bank-society relations in general. And so a lot of the ways in which people engage in their daily rounds in social life is by using various types of payment apps and all sorts of financial services.
Like Venmo, for instance.
Like Venmo, for instance. And so one of the things we want to ask is, how are bank-society relations changing across the globe? And so last November, I was out in Argentina with the colleague there, Ariel Wilkes, and we were running around doing field work in these really marginal areas on the edge of the city, the equivalent of what they call in Brazil favelas. And we were looking at these social branches of banks and talking to people who were using those branches and also talking to community groups who had advocated to get these branches brought to their community.
What do you mean by social branches?
So by social branches, we mean that these were areas that were considered dangerous, low income, and therefore the bank, instead of opening up a regular branch, they would open up a social branch in which part of the bank's mission was to engage in education with the people in the area about this is how you use a bank. And I actually had a really heartwarming moment of watching one of the guards who was regulating how many people were coming in to use an ATM machine. But he also noted that he was a financial educator because a lot of these people, they didn't know how to use the bank machine. And so he would give them advice about how to use the machine, would tell them who to talk to upstairs in the bank for other types of services. And he said, I really love this job because I'm not just a guard, I'm actually helping people. And so you have these really wonderful experiences in which people see the presence of a bank as a way of saying, you too are part of society. And somehow the absence of any banking services was a way of saying, you don't belong, and there's no way of getting a sense of belonging. And so I think one of the things that we take for granted is the extent to which banks and financial services really do matter when you're thinking about having a sense of being assimilated into a society. And when you think about what the mainstream has, we always talk about the mainstream, and if you don't have a bank, if you don't have basic financial services, then you're not even close to the mainstream, and you have no hopes for it.
Right. Interesting. Thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing some of your work.
Yeah, thank you.
For more information about Professor Wherry and his research, please visit our website at macmillanreport.yale.edu. Be sure to join us again for another episode of the Macmillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale.